this video explaining how to use a library, the DLL library we provided in this framework. There are two types of DLL libraries. First one is .NET Framework library. We have developed the sample project using this .NET Framework library, but all the code samples and the functionality provided in these code samples are compatible with the .NET Core library as well. If you have used .NET Core based application, or if you are using .NET Core library in your integration project, you can use same code samples we provided in the sample project. The sample project was done using .NET Framework 4.8, as I said. This framework library or .NET Core library you can use with whatever the programming language you use. You can use with the Java project, you can use with .NET, whatever the type of application, the ASP.NET, Windows Forms, MAUI, or whatever the type of project you use in the .NET, you can use that. Also Node applications, Python, and any other framework that you use, like PHP, you can use this .NET or .NET Framework library. The requirements is that you need to have .NET 8 if you are using .NET 8 library, or .NET Framework 4.8 if you are using .NET Framework library, as well as the Java 11 if you use simulation APIs, because the simulation API basically uses Java interfaces. So once you have downloaded .NET Framework library, the downloaded zip file, you can use it with the framework project, the code sample project we have provided here. What you have to do is you download this project as a zip file, and once it's downloaded, you can extract that file and refer the Zatca invoice DLL and Zatca library DLL as well as client comp DLL into the .NET Framework sample application, the sample project. The downloading would take like 5 to 10 minutes depending on the internet speed of your local network. While it gets downloaded, let's explore the contents. When you run this .NET Framework sample project, the startup screen is like this, where you can see 3 buttons. The first button is EGS onboarding. That is how you onboard your EGS units with Zatca portal. And the second one is invoice reporting. That is to report simplified invoices. You can report simplified invoice, simplified credit note, simplified debit note, or simplified prepayment invoice. Also, the samples are provided to clear the invoices. You can clear the standard invoice, you can clear standard credit note, standard debit note, or prepayment invoices. There are various applications with these DLL libraries we will explain during this video. So I will remind again, you need a Windows environment if you are running this project in C# and you need to download the DLL files and you need to do a reference to the certain DLLs in the DLL files. You keep it in a directory, and from that directory you need to reference Zatca invoice, Zatca library and client count for running this project in your local machine. Once it has downloaded, you can open this DLL library in the zip file and note these DLL files. The first one is Zatca invoice DLL. The next one is Zatca library DLL. The third one is the client com.dll. You need to reference these three libraries in the code samples project from where you have downloaded and extracted. You need to keep these files in one directory for reference purposes. Even when you are using these DLL files in your final project, you need to refer that DLL files in the particular location that you have downloaded the DLL library files. Now let's look at the functionality of this EGS onboarding form. This form is basically used to onboard EGS device. Common name, serial number, UID, that is the VAT number, and the unit name, company name, the location. This is a short location in your address, the certificate in the Saudi Arabia, and type of industry, country name, and the type of documents you generate in this particular EGS unit. Either is simplified invoice only or the standard invoice only, or if you are using to generate both simplified and standard invoices, you need to select the common invoice type and the OTP. This is the OTP number that provides in the Zatca portal. If it's the development portal, always use 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. That is a constant. If for any other portal like a simulation portal or production portal, when you are registering or adding a new EGS unit in particular portal, you will have OTP, and that OTP number to be entered here. For the demonstration purposes, I use the developer portal. Once the developer portal, the compliance CSID is generated for that particular button pressed, the CSR private key, the compliance production CSID will be generated. Although the certificate, that is the decoded, the compliance CSID and the secret request ID also will be generated. If you are using this DLL library for any project you do in a different programming environment, you can use this code base and you can develop the type of forms you require in that particular application. So all the APIs and the functions are provided in the DLL itself, so you don't need any other resource. Let's register the simplified only EGS unit using this information. So first of all, you request a compliance CSID and it will generate a compliance CSID. And once it's generated, if you have selected the simplified only, you need to submit or the report 3 simplified invoices: simplified invoice, simplified credit note, and simplified debit note into the compliance API. So we will explain what is a compliance API, or how to report or clear the compliance invoices when we are explaining this invoice reporting and invoice clearing screens and associated codes. If you have selected standard only, you need to submit 3 standard invoices: standard invoice, standard debit note and standard credit note into the compliance endpoint. That is the next step. And if you have selected the both simplified and standard invoices, you need to submit 3 reports or the 3 reportings of an invoice, credit note, debit note in the simplified form, as well as 3 invoices in a standard form: standard invoice, standard debit note and standard credit note. Altogether 6 invoices to be posted into the compliance API. All these functions of posting into the compliance endpoints or the compliance API are provided in these 2 forms, and it will be explained in detail when we are explaining these 2 functions or the 2 invoice types. Once you have submitted either 3 invoices or the 6 invoices, you can request a production CSID. But for the development portal, it's not mandatory to post compliance invoices before requesting production CSID. But all the other environments, like the simulation of production, you need to obtain relevant OTP from the Zatca portal, either from the simulation portal or the production portal. And then once after requesting compliance CSID, you need to post either 3 invoices or 6 invoices into the compliance endpoint before you posting using the production CSID or using this function. And finally, once it's generated, now I will explain you how it's doing. As I said, the development portal doesn't require you to send a report or clear compliance invoices. So we generate a production CSID. Here you can see it was successful and production CSID was generated. For the purpose of this application or this demonstration, in this sample project, we will keep these details or the information that generated in a text files. So I do save that. But in your production application, you can save these details in your database tables. Here I will explain you what each of these functions does in the sample project. As I explained, you can generate compliance CSID using this button. What it basically does is it calls a Zatca wrapper project and then the pass the invoice type, because the Zatca API require 01004 simplified only, and if it's a standard only 1000, and both simplified and standard we need to pass 1100. Also the registration environment, if it's a development portal, it's non-production, simulation portal, it's a simulation, and the production portal, it's a production. Once it's environment selected, you can call this CSR generation function in the Zatca wrapper, then you can get the results. Rest of the code shows how to show that information that was generated in the UI. Probably for your application you may not require that. So once it's generated, you can store that in the database tables you maintain in your application. Once the compliance invoices are posted, as I explained previously, you can request for the production CSID. In the production CSID also, we need to pass the environment with non-production, simulation, or the production. And in the Zatca wrapper, there's a function called a great production certificate. And once the production certificate received, you can get the necessary information into the UI. And there's one thing that we need to note down. If the registration type is simulation, then then you need to wrap the certificate in the begin certificate and end certificate tags. That is essential. You can press this button, report above created invoice, button 2. Report the invoice into Zatca portal. If invoice reporting is successful, you can see this commit and the status pass and reporting status reported. If there's any warning or error, you can see the warnings and error messages in this array of messages. Similarly, you can create a simplified credit note using this button, and we will explain you how to do that coding. There's a very simple code to do that, and you can report that simplified credit note using the same button. And simplified debit note is also the same. You can report it here. And simplified prepayment invoice also you can report using the same function. And if it's a compliance based on compliance CSID, not the production CSID, in order to obtain the production CSID in a simulation and the production portal, as I explained previously, you need to submit 3 simplified invoices, simplified invoice, credit note and debit note, into the compliance portal, and then you can request for the production CSID that we have explained previously. Similarly, if you have requested 6 type of invoices into that EGS machine, then you need to submit 3 simplified invoice, or you need to report 3 simplified invoices and clear 3 standard invoice prior to obtaining the production CSID. So I created a simplified invoice here, and similarly I can report that into compliance CSID. But you can't do that now because currently you are in production CSID. With the production CSID, you can't report simplified invoices into the compliance portal. So for that purpose, you need to get the compliance CSID. Right, I'm going to the EGS onboarding form again and use simplified and get the compliance CSID. And then I'm saving that files. Then again I'm visiting, creating simplified invoice, and then reporting that invoice into the compliance portal. You can see this is a compliance report. Similarly, the credit note you can post into the compliance portal, and debit note you can post into the compliance portal. Let's see how each of these function works in the code in your sample project. See, in the reporting screen you can see the create simplified invoice. For that, you can use a populate invoice method after creating Zatca invoice object and add customer and add supplier. And then if there's a document level allowance, you can do that, and it's important you pass the correct license key. The license key you can obtain using generate license key function. Once the license key is generated, you can copy that and then you can paste it here so that you can have full access to the portal. Here we are creating invoice lines and adding invoice line into the invoice, and then finally we are generating the invoice. Once invoice is generated, you can report. Here you report the invoice into the Zatca portal. You sign invoice file, and if it's a production and non-production, you call this sign XML invoice method, and if it's a simulation, you need to call sign invoice Java method. And here you pass the correct license key, and finally the report simplified. If it's reported, you can see the success. Otherwise, if it's not reported and if there's a due to error, the submission status is reported with returned with error. And rest of the code is updating the UI. Probably you may not require that in your program. Similarly, if you are reporting into the compliance portal, all this code, the previously shown, is same, but this method is different. Instead of report simplified, you call it a report compliance. Right. Also, this function, we call it to convert PDF A3 sample. In the PDF A3 sample, once you visit, you can see that it instantiates PDF A3 converter class and then provide your original PDF file, and then the XML document file that you generated. If it's simplified invoice, you can provide the part of that invoice, and then you call this function copy PDF A3, and here you provide a PDF part, you provide a XML file part. Also, you can see that once the QR code is generated, it will be saved in a particular path. If you need to generate a QR code when you are reporting the simplified invoice, or after reporting the simplified invoice, you have to provide the path for the QR image, and you can obtain the QR code from the invoice, from the signed invoice. You can provide the path to the signed XML, and then it will generate the simplified QR, and you can get QR image using get QR image function in the Zatca wrapper class, where you have to provide simplified QR path, the string of the simplified QR, and QR code image path, that where you need to store the QR code image. And then you can pass that image location into the picture box, and it will display the QR code. Here you can see, once you create a simplified invoice, and when you are clearing the simplified invoice or reporting the simplified invoice, the QR code will be generated and the image will be stored in the path you provided. Finally, we could see how to use invoice clearing. Similar to simplified invoices, there are three types of standard invoices: standard invoice, credit note, debit note, and additionally if you require the prepayment invoices for the advance payments. Similar to prepayment simplified invoices, there's a compliance invoice clearing function in addition to the normal clearing function. What you couldn't see in a simplified invoice, there's a button called a show cleared invoice. We will explain all of this. You could create a standard invoice using this function. The generated standard invoice, you can do the clearance using this button. If it's cleared successfully, you could see in the response warning messages null, the error messages null, and the status pass. There's one important thing. The clearance status indicated as cleared, and you could see the cleared invoice in base 64. This is one important thing. And here the QR code is also generated based on the QR code stored in this base 64 invoice. If you want to decode this base 64 invoice and see the content inside, you can press this show cleared invoice button. And here you can see the cleared invoice. Similar to the simplified invoices, you could create a standard credit note here and clear the standard credit note, and you could use creating standard debit note function and clear it. The functionality is almost always same. If you need to clear the compliance invoices based on compliance CSID, you could use this functionality or this piece of code. Now I'm going to explain you the invoice clearing. Here, when you create the invoice, you're creating a customer and supplier. In this case, customer is the company, the registered company, unlike the walk-in customers in simplified invoices. Here your details, and you are creating a GUID and then creating an invoice. The important thing is you need to pass the license key similar to what you did in the simplified invoice by obtaining from the website. And then the invoice will be generated. And then when you want to clear the invoice, here also you need to pass the license key stored somewhere in your program, and here you sign the invoice, then you are passing into the clear standard function, and you have to specify the environment, if it's non-production, production or simulation, then it will be generated. And here from the response, this function obtains the cleared QR code, and below code is just the purpose of displaying the generated QR code. Here, if you need to submit or clear the standard invoice into the compliance CSID, the compliance portal, before updating the production portal for the simulation and production environments, you need to use clear standard compliance function in the Zatca library. Rest of the code is to display the contents, responses, and the error messages if any. I hope that you understand how this sample code works and how to integrate each of these functions in the classes Zatca invoice and the Zatca library functions, the classes provided in those functions. So if you have any further questions, feel free to ask, and we are always supports for your integration efforts. Thank you for looking.